She was left stranded on a back road with 3 children in a storm that felt like the end of the world, until headlights cut through the darkness and a man who hadn't smiled in years opened the gate that would change all their lives forever. Can you imagine the desperation of a widowed mother being kicked out of her home in the middle of the night, under a torrential downpour, carrying small children trembling with cold and fear, with nowhere to go, without a single place in the world she could call her own? But this story actually happened in March of 1978 in the rural countryside of Tennessee, and what came after that stormy night no one could have imagined. Before I continue this story that will move you from beginning to end, I need to ask you for a quick favor. If you like true, emotional stories of overcoming the odds, please subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any new stories. Also, leave a like to support this work and tell me in the comments if you believe that some people enter our lives exactly when we need them the most. Now let's get to the story. Beatrice Cordell was only 29, but her eyes carried an exhaustion that seemed to belong to someone much older. 8 months prior, she was a married woman with a home of her own, a hard-working husband, and 3 healthy children. 8 months prior, she still believed life had some predictability, some safety. After the tractor tipped over on Julian that hot July afternoon, everything crumbled with terrifying speed. Julian Cordell was the foreman of a large farm near Franklin. A 32-year-old man, strong as an ox, with an easy smile and hands calloused from honest work. He and Beatrice lived in a simple but dignified tenant house on the property where he worked. It wasn't theirs, but the landowner allowed the foreman's family to live there. It was a common arrangement. Julian received a modest wage, the house, and a small patch of land where Beatrice grew vegetables. It wasn't wealth, but it was enough. The boys grew up healthy, bellies full, bare feet running across the red clay yard. When Julian was crushed by the tractor that rolled down an embankment, Beatrice thought the pain of loss would be the worst thing she'd face. She was wrong. The grief was just the beginning. The boss, a stern man named Mr. Giovanni Moretti, attended the funeral, hat in hand and expression grave. Beatrice remembers his voice, slow and formal, saying he was deeply sorry, that Julian was a good man, and that she had 2 months to reorganize, 2 months to vacate the house. Beatrice had no family in the area. She was from closer to Nashville, an only child of parents long past. She had married Julian at 20 and moved to the country following his work. Julian's family was small and complicated. His mother, Mrs. Irene, was a bitter 63-year-old woman who had never approved of the marriage. She thought Beatrice was stuck up, full of airs, not subservient enough. Julian's only brother was Virgil, 3 years younger, single, a heavy drinker who worked odd jobs at a sawmill. 2 days after the burial, Virgil showed up at Beatrice's house. He arrived in the middle of the afternoon, smelling of whiskey even that early, a dirty hat pulled low on his head. Beatrice was sitting on the porch steps, staring at nothing, the children playing silently near her. Thomas, the oldest, was only 7, but already understood that something terrible had happened. Laura, 5 years old, cried at the drop of a hat, as if the grief of the world had settled on her small shoulders. Michael, just 3, looked for his father, asking where he was when he was coming back. Virgil spat on the ground before speaking. "Listen here, Bea," he said with a raspy voice. "Mama's all alone now. You're gonna have to leave this house anyway. Why don't you come live with her and help take care of things? She's old, needs someone." Beatrice felt something cold slide down her spine. Living with Mrs. Irene, who had always treated her like an intruder, was a prospect almost as terrible as the streets. But she had 3 mouths to feed, no skills other than cooking and keeping house, and 2 months that would slip away like water through fingers. She accepted. What choice did she have? She gathered the few things she owned, put the boys in the truck Virgil had hitched a ride with, and moved into Mrs. Irene's cramped house on the edge of town. The house was dark wood, damp, with 2 tiny rooms and a yard full of scrawny chickens. The smell of mold and reheated food permeated everything. Mrs. Irene received Beatrice with a dry nod and immediately began barking orders. "You'll sleep in the living room with the boys. You have to wake up early to make coffee. The chickens need feeding every day at 6 in the morning. And the children can't make noise. My head can't take it." The first 3 months were a silent hell. Beatrice worked from sunup to sundown, cooking, washing, cleaning, caring for a mother-in-law who complained about everything. The children walked on tiptoes, whispered instead of speaking, lost the shine in their eyes. Thomas became withdrawn, suspicious. Laura developed a nervous tic of biting her nails until they bled. Michael stopped asking for his father and started wetting the bed every night, which earned furious scoldings from Mrs. Irene. Virgil appeared occasionally, usually drunk, ate whatever Beatrice had cooked, borrowed money from his mother that he never returned, and left. He looked at Beatrice in a way she didn't like, a lingering gaze that stayed too long on her neckline, her legs, the curve of her hips. Beatrice started wearing looser clothes, avoiding being alone in the same room with him. In January of 1978, 5 months after Julian's death, Virgil arrived differently. He was sober, shaved, wearing clean clothes. He sat in the kitchen and announced he was getting married. The bride was named Connie, a divorcee 10 years his senior, who owned a small general store in the village. She had money saved up and a difficult temperament. Mrs. Irene was radiant. Finally, one of her sons was making something of himself, she said. Finally, she would have a real daughter-in-law, not that one who only served to drain resources. Beatrice felt the ground shake beneath her feet. If Virgil married and brought Connie to live there, and it was obvious that's what would happen because the house belonged to Mrs. Irene and Virgil was the son, there would be no room for her and the children. Beatrice tried to talk to Virgil in private. She caught him in the yard 3 days after the announcement, while he was fixing the chicken coop fence. "Virgil," she began with a cautious voice, "I just wanted to know, with your wedding, if we'll still be able to stay here, or if I need to start looking for another place." Virgil didn't look at her, kept hammering the wire to the wood. "Connie doesn't want other women in the house," he replied with no emotion in his voice. "Says every family needs their own space." Beatrice felt her hands turn cold. "So I need to leave?" He shrugged. "Yeah, it'd be best. You're young, Bea. Find another husband, sort your life out. You can't depend on my mama forever." His coldness cut like a knife. Beatrice took a deep breath, tried to keep her voice steady. "All right, Virgil. How much time do I have?" He finally looked at her, his gaze empty, indifferent. "A month. Maybe 2. Connie hasn't set a date yet, but it won't be long. She wants to marry soon." Beatrice spent the following weeks in silent panic. She looked for work in all the big houses in the region, offering herself as a cook, washerwoman, ironer. No one wanted a maid with 3 small children in tow. She looked for a cheap boarding house, but even the most miserable ones charged a rate she couldn't pay. She asked the church pastor for help. He promised to pray and ask the congregation, but nothing came up. She went to the town hall, to the non-existent social services of the time, knocked on every door she knew. Nothing. In March, Virgil announced the wedding would be on the 15th, a Saturday, a simple ceremony at the Justice of the Peace. Connie had already come to the house twice, a tall, thin woman with hawk eyes and thin lips. She looked at Beatrice the way one looks at an old piece of furniture that needs discarding. She looked at the children as if they were pests. On the second visit, she was direct. "You found another place, right?" "Because starting the 16th, I'm moving in and I'm doing a full renovation. I don't want anyone underfoot." Beatrice begged for 1 more week. "Just a few more days for me to get organized?" she asked with the dignity she had left. Connie huffed impatiently, but agreed. 1 week, not a day more. The week passed in a blur. Beatrice tried everything, thought of everything. She considered going back to her hometown, but she had no one there, and the bus fare for 4 people was money she didn't possess. She thought about asking for shelter in the church, but the pastor explained, embarrassed, that the church didn't have the facilities to house families. She thought desperate things that shamed her later, like leaving the children at an orphanage so she could work. But when she looked at Thomas, Laura, and Michael, she knew she'd rather die. On March 22nd, 1978, a Friday, Virgil arrived home at dusk, completely drunk. The wedding had been the previous Saturday. He and Connie had travelled to the city for a few days, and now they were back. Connie would arrive the next day with a moving truck. Virgil stumbled in, eyes red, breath sour with whiskey. Mrs. Irene had gone to spend the night at a friend's house, escaping the storm that was brewing. The children were already lying down in the living room, wrapped in thin blankets. Beatrice was finishing packing the suitcases, 2 battered cardboard suitcases that contained everything she and her children owned in the world. Virgil stopped in the doorway of the living room, leaned against the frame, watched her folding small clothes with trembling hands. "You're still here," he said, slurring his words. "Connie's going to have a fit if she sees you tomorrow morning." Beatrice swallowed her tears. "I know, Virgil. I'm leaving tonight, don't worry. I'm just finishing packing." He laughed, a wet, unpleasant sound. "Tonight? Are you crazy? Look at that rain." Beatrice looked out the window. Indeed, the rain had started an hour ago and was now falling thick and heavy, the kind of March rain that turns streets into rivers. Lightning tore across the sky frequently, thunder shaking the roof tiles. "I'm going anyway," Beatrice said softly. "I have no choice." Virgil shrugged, indifferent. "Your problem. I just don't want you here tomorrow." He turned to leave, but stopped, looked at her over his shoulder. "You know, Bea, if you were nicer to me, maybe we could negotiate you staying a while longer." The way he said nicer made it clear what he meant. Beatrice felt nausea rise in her throat. "Get out of here, Virgil," she said with a firmness she didn't know she still possessed. He laughed again, stumbled out, and locked himself in his room. Beatrice heard him fall onto the bed and snore minutes later. She looked at her sleeping children. Thomas was awake, eyes open in the gloom. He had heard everything. "Mama," the boy whispered, "where are we going?" Beatrice knelt beside him, stroked his dark hair. "We'll find a place, son. Do you trust Mama?" Thomas nodded, but his eyes said he was terrified. At 10 at night, Beatrice woke Laura and Michael. "Put this on, my love," she said to Laura, handing her a cardigan. The girl obeyed sleepily. Michael whimpered, wanting to keep sleeping. Beatrice dressed him with quick hands, put a little wool hat on his head. Thomas was already up, putting on his worn-out shoes. Beatrice grabbed the 2 suitcases, took a deep breath, and opened the front door. The rain fell as if the sky had torn open. The dirt road was already pure mud. There were no streetlights in that part of town. The darkness was almost solid, broken only by frequent lightning flashes. Beatrice didn't have an umbrella big enough for everyone. She had an old plastic poncho that she opened and tried to use to cover the children. In seconds, they were all soaked. She didn't know where to go. She started walking toward the town center, vaguely thinking of looking for some abandoned warehouse, some awning where they could spend the night. The cardboard suitcases became heavy with water, started to disintegrate. Clothes fell into the mud. Beatrice tried to gather them, gave up. Laura was crying, clinging to her skirt. Michael had gone back to sleep in her arms, dead weight. Thomas walked alongside, silent, shivering with cold, carrying the remaining suitcase. How long did they walk? Beatrice couldn't say later. Half an hour, maybe more. The streets were deserted, no cars, no living soul. The rain gave no respite. Lightning illuminated the world in terrifying white flashes. At some point, Beatrice got lost. She took a street she didn't know, then another, trying to avoid the flooded parts. She ended up on a gravel road leading out of town into the rural zone. She didn't realize the mistake until she was too far out, and by then she was too exhausted to turn back. Her legs failed first. They simply stopped obeying. Beatrice fell to her knees in the mud, still holding Michael. Laura fell beside her, crying convulsively. Thomas shouted, "Mama!" and tried to help her up, but he was 7 years old and weighed 60 pounds. There was nothing he could do. Beatrice tried to rise, fell again. The darkness on the side of the road was absolute. The rain was so cold, her fingers were numb. She looked at the black sky and allowed herself for the first time in 8 months to give up. "Julian," she whispered to the nothingness, "I tried. I swear I tried. But I can't take it anymore. Take care of them, please." She lay in the mud, pulled the children close to her, covered them with her own body. Thomas was screaming, "No, Mama, get up," but his voice vanished in the roar of the storm. Beatrice closed her eyes. The cold slowly ceased to bother her. The rain stopped feeling wet. Everything became distant and confused. She didn't see the headlights approaching down the road. She didn't hear the rumble of the old Jeep's engine. She didn't feel it when large, strong hands lifted her from the mud. When Beatrice opened her eyes again, she was confused. The first sensation was warmth, true, enveloping warmth that penetrated her frozen bones. The second was softness. She was lying on something soft, covered by something heavy and warm. She tried to move, and every muscle in her body protested with sharp pain. She managed to open her eyes completely and saw a ceiling of light wood, thick beams, a kerosene lamp swaying gently. It wasn't Mrs. Irene's house. It wasn't anywhere she knew. Beatrice tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness knocked her back down. "Where am I?" she whispered to the air. The door opened, and a man entered. A large man, broad shoulders, at least 40 years old, dark hair graying at the temples, a few days' stubble, a face marked by the sun and time. He wore simple farmer's clothes, a flannel shirt, denim jeans, boots caked with mud. His eyes were dark, deep, with a permanent sadness that even a stranger could perceive. "You're awake," he said with a deep, gravelly voice. Beatrice tried to focus on him. "My children," was the first thing she managed to say. "Where are my children?" The man made a calming gesture. "They're safe, in the next room sleeping. They're fine, just tired and sniffly. I gave them hot tea, covered them with blankets. They've been asleep for about 2 hours. Beatrice felt hot tears run down her face. She tried to get out of bed again. The man approached, held her by the shoulders firmly, but without brutality. "You need to rest, Mom," he said. "You almost died of hypothermia. I brought you and the kids to my house, found you passed out at my farm gate soaked in the mud, brought you here, changed the wet clothes, gave you tea, warmed you up. You slept almost 4 hours. Beatrice looked at him through her tears. "Who are you?" He stepped back, shoved his hands in his pockets, uncomfortable with the gratitude he saw in her face. "Henry," he replied. "Henry Sullivan. This is my farm." "And you saved me," Beatrice said with a broken voice. "Saved my children." Henry looked away. "I did what anyone would do," he replied with a hard voice. "Nothing special about it." But there was something special. Beatrice noticed it in the way he couldn't look directly at her, in the way his hands trembled slightly, in the way he seemed uncomfortable with his own kindness. She wiped her face, tried to compose herself. "I'm sorry," she said. "Sorry to be a burden. Tomorrow morning we'll leave. Don't worry. We just needed a place to pass the night. But it must have stopped raining, so tomorrow we'll go and leave you in peace." Henry finally looked at her. "Where are you going?" The question was simple, but Beatrice had no answer. She opened her mouth, closed it, felt her chin tremble. "I don't know," she admitted in a low voice. "I don't know." Henry remained silent for a long moment. The kerosene lamp cast long shadows on his face, accentuating the lines of bitterness around his mouth. He seemed to be fighting an internal battle. Finally he sighed, a heavy sigh of someone about to do something against their better judgment. "There's a caretaker's cottage at the back of the property," he said with a firm, almost harsh voice. "It's been empty for 6 months since the last hand left. It's small, 2 bedrooms, kitchen with a wood stove, no luxury at all, but it has a good roof and it stays dry. You all can stay there, temporarily, until you get organized." Beatrice blinked, sure she had misunderstood. "You are offering a house?" "Not an offer," Henry corrected sharply. "It's a temporary arrangement. You'll have to work to pay for it. I need someone to cook for me and for Mr. Jasper, who is my head hand and lives in the other house. I need someone to wash, iron, keep the big house clean. In exchange, you have a roof and food. When you manage to save money and find another place, you leave. That's it. It's not charity." But it was charity, and they both knew it. Henry was giving her exactly what she needed, disguising it as a business deal to spare her pride. Beatrice felt something open in her chest, something like hope, a sensation she hadn't experienced in so long she almost didn't recognize it. "I accept," she said quickly, before he changed his mind. "I work well, you'll see. I cook, clean, wash, do whatever is needed. The children won't cause trouble, I promise. Thomas already helps with everything. Laura is quiet. Michael is small, but obedient. We won't be a bother." Henry nodded, his expression closed. "Tomorrow morning I'll show you the house. Now sleep. There are dry clothes on the chair there. I left them out. Old clothes I had stored away. They'll do until you wash yours. Tomorrow we'll talk properly about the work and the rules." He turned to leave. "Mr. Henry," Beatrice called out. He stopped but didn't turn around. "Thank you," she said, her voice choked up. "You saved our lives today." Henry stood motionless for 3 seconds. Then he left without saying a word and closed the door carefully. Beatrice lay back down, pulled the blanket up to her chin, and cried in silence. But this time it wasn't tears of despair. It was tears of relief, of gratitude, of accumulated exhaustion that could finally be released. She fell asleep seconds later, and for the first time in months had a dreamless sleep. When she woke up again, it was broad daylight. The rain had stopped. Through the window, golden late morning light poured in. Beatrice got up slowly, testing her body. Everything hurt, but she could walk. She put on the clothes Henry had left, a pair of denim trousers that were too big and had to be tied with twine, and a men's flannel shirt that reached her knees. There were no shoes. She walked barefoot to the door, opened it carefully. She was in a large, beautiful house, made of light timber and well-maintained. Her room opened onto a wide hallway with several doors. She followed the smell of coffee and found the kitchen, spacious, clean, with a wood stove lit and a large table in the center. Henry was sitting drinking coffee, reading an old newspaper. On the other side of the table was an old, small man, maybe 70 years old, white hair, face wrinkled like a raisin, a friendly smile. The 3 children were sitting eating biscuits with butter and warm milk, more animated than Beatrice had seen them in months. "Mama!" shouted Michael upon seeing her, and scrambled down from the chair to hug her legs. Beatrice picked him up, feeling her heart squeeze with love. Thomas and Laura came too, hugged her tightly. "You're better, Miss Beatrice," said the old man with a thick country accent. "Praise the Lord. I'm Jasper, the hand here on the farm. What a scare you gave us yesterday." Beatrice smiled, embarrassed. "Sorry for the trouble." Henry folded the newspaper, stood up. "It's no trouble," he said with a neutral voice. "Finish eating something. Then I'll show you the house where you'll be staying. Jasper will help carry some basics, pots, blankets, firewood. You have the whole day to get settled. Tomorrow you start work. Is that too early?" "No, sir," replied Beatrice quickly. "Tomorrow is perfect." Henry nodded and went out the back door. Jasper served a plate for Beatrice, warm biscuits, real butter, strong, sweet coffee. She ate slowly, savoring every bite, watching her children eat with an appetite she hadn't seen in ages. Laura laughed at something Jasper was saying. Thomas ate seriously, but seemed less tense. Michael had a milk moustache and swung his little legs under the high chair. After breakfast, Henry returned and guided them to the caretaker's cottage. It was 200 yards from the main house, following a stone path between fruit trees. It really was a small house, light wood like the big house, with a narrow porch, 2 windows in the front. Henry opened the door and they entered. The living room was small but cozy, with an old but clean sofa, a coffee table, a lamp. The kitchen had a wood stove that looked new, a sink with a manual pump, a table with 4 chairs. There were 2 bedrooms, a larger one with a double bed and wardrobe, another smaller one with 2 narrow single beds. The children explored everything with contained excitement. Laura discovered that from one window you could see an orchard with heavy fruit trees. Thomas checked every door and window, assuming the role of man of the house. Michael simply ran from one room to another laughing. Beatrice stood in the middle of the living room, trying not to cry again. "It's too good, Mr. Henry," she said with a trembling voice. "It's more than we deserve." Henry seemed uncomfortable with her emotion. "It's just a house," he said curtly. "Jasper will bring the missing things. Any problem with the house, tell me and I'll fix it. Work starts tomorrow at 6 in the morning at the big house. You can bring the children if you have no one to leave them with, but they have to stay quiet and not break anything. Understood?" "Understood, sir," replied Beatrice. Henry left without another word. Jasper arrived minutes later with an armful of blankets, pots, plates, cutlery, chopped wood. He was talkative and kind, bringing things in and telling stories. "This stove here is good. Heats up fast," he said while lighting the fire to show her. "The sink pump sticks sometimes, but just give it a little tap here on the side and it lets go. The roof doesn't leak anywhere. Mr. Henry is very careful with the houses. He's a good boss, you know. Strict, closed off, doesn't talk much, but he's fair and has a good heart under that hard shell." Beatrice helped organize things, listening. "Why is he so closed off, Mr. Jasper?" she asked cautiously. Jasper became serious, voice lower. "Tragedy, Miss Beatrice. He lost his wife and child 3 years ago. She died in childbirth, the baby too. Since that day he hasn't been the same. Became hard, solitary. Doesn't want anything to do with people, doesn't go into town, doesn't receive visitors, just me and him here on the farm. It's sad to see a good man closing himself off to the world like that." Beatrice felt her heart tighten. So that was it. The sadness she saw in his eyes had a name and a face. He had lost everything too, just like her. Maybe that was why he helped her. He recognized in her the same helplessness he carried himself. "Poor man," she murmured. "Must be a terrible pain." Jasper nodded. "Yeah. That's why when he brought you and the kids last night, I was surprised. It's been 3 years since he let anyone inside that house. You must have touched something in him, some scrap of humanity he thought he'd lost." Beatrice spent the rest of the day fixing up the house, washing mud-soaked clothes that Jasper had recovered from the road, cooking a simple dinner with the groceries he brought from the big house pantry. At night, with the children sleeping exhausted in the bedrooms, she sat on the small porch and looked at the clear sky full of stars. The storm had passed. The air smelled of wet earth and flowers. The silence was deep, broken only by crickets and some critter in the woods. It was a good, peaceful silence, so different from the tense silence of Mrs. Irene's house. Far away she saw lights on in the big house. Henry was still awake. She wondered what he did alone in that huge house, if he thought about his dead wife, if the pain was still sharp, or if it had become a constant, familiar companion. She wondered if he had opened his home to her and the children just out of kindness, or if he was also tired of the loneliness he had chosen himself. Either way, she promised herself she wouldn't disappoint him. She would work hard, keep the kids behaved, and when he was ready for them to leave, she would go without making a scene. But for now, for the first time in 8 months, she had a roof over her head and a reason to believe they might survive after all. Beatrice woke before dawn the next day. Her body still ached, but she had a commitment. By 5:30 she was up, washed her face in the icy pump water, tied her hair in a tight bun, put on the least worn clothes she owned. The children were still sleeping deeply. She left a scribbled note for Thomas in case they woke up, saying she was working and would be back to give them breakfast. She crossed the stone path, still wet with dew. Arriving at the big house exactly at 6 o'clock, the back door was unlocked. Beatrice entered carefully, found the kitchen empty, but with signs that someone had already passed through. There were dirty cups in the sink, coffee grounds in the filter, breadcrumbs on the table. She started immediately, washed the dishes, cleaned the table, swept the floor, lit the wood stove, put water on to boil, made fresh coffee, found eggs, smoked sausage, 2-day-old bread that could be toasted, prepared a full breakfast. Henry appeared at 6:30. He entered through the kitchen door, coming from outside, boots muddy, shirt stained with sweat. He had already put in a half-day's work before breakfast. He stopped upon seeing the set table, the steaming coffee, scrambled eggs with sausage, toast with butter. "Didn't need to do all this," he said with a harsh voice. Simple coffee was enough. Beatrice wiped her hands on the apron she had found. "You gave me a job, I'm going to do it right," she replied firmly. Henry sat down without further comment, ate in silence. Beatrice stood near the stove, not knowing if she should sit too or wait. He noticed her discomfort. "You can sit and eat," he said without looking. "I don't own slaves. A worker eats at the same table as me." Beatrice sat on the edge of the chair, served herself a small portion. They ate in a silence broken only by the sound of cutlery. Jasper arrived soon after, smiling and talkative as always, filled the silence with stories about the chickens that had escaped the coop during the storm. After breakfast, Henry explained the routine. Beatrice should prepare breakfast before 6:30, lunch at noon, supper at 7 in the evening. In the intervals, clean the big house, wash and iron clothes as needed, tend the garden if there was time left over. On Sundays she was off, except for lunch which needed to be made anyway. She would receive a modest wage at the end of the month, plus the house and groceries. Beatrice agreed to everything, too grateful to negotiate. The first days were of adaptation. The big house was enormous by Beatrice's standards. A wide living room with dark, solid wood furniture, worn leather sofas but of quality, shelves full of dusty books. A formal dining room that obviously hadn't been used in years. An office with a large desk, covered in farm administration papers. 3 bedrooms upstairs, one clearly the master bedroom where Henry slept. And a room at the end of the hall that was always locked. Beatrice cleaned everything except that mysterious room. Henry never mentioned it, never gave the key, and she didn't ask, but her curiosity grew. Jasper, in a moment of conversation while helping carry water, let it slip. "It's the room he prepared for the baby," said the old man with sadness. "He set it all up before the birth. Wooden crib he carved himself, clothes the wife sewed, toys. When she died with the baby in her belly, he locked that room and never opened it again. They say he keeps everything exactly as it was. It's his way of not forgetting." The revelation cut Beatrice's heart. She understood then the depth of Henry's pain. He hadn't just lost a wife and child, but he maintained a sanctuary for that future that never existed. It was both moving and worrying. A man who cannot let go. Weeks passed. March turned into April. The routine settled into a quiet rhythm. Beatrice woke early, made coffee, cleaned, cooked, cared. Henry remained closed off, spoke only what was necessary, spent the whole day working on the farm. but small changes began to appear. One day, Beatrice had to take Michael to work because the boy had woken up with a low fever, and she didn't want to leave him alone. Michael stayed quiet in a corner of the kitchen, playing with scraps of wood Jasper had given him. Henry came in for lunch, saw the boy, furrowed his brow. "Child sick?" he asked with a gruff voice. Beatrice hurried to explain. "Just a little fever, sir. Gave him herbal tea, it's already gone down. Tomorrow he stays home. Sorry for the trouble." Henry looked at Michael, who watched him with large, frightened eyes. The man sighed, went out, came back 5 minutes later with a bottle of medicine. "Give him 2 drops of this, 3 times a day," he said, handing over the bottle. "It's a tonic, helps ward off colds." Beatrice took the bottle with both hands, surprised. "Thank you, sir." "You didn't have to." Henry was already leaving. "Sick kid only causes problems later," he grumbled, but there was no real harshness in his voice. Another time, Thomas appeared at the big house looking for his mother. The boy had hurt his knee falling from a tree, bleeding a little. Beatrice panicked, grabbed clean cloths, water. Henry was in the office, heard the commotion, appeared. Saw Thomas sitting on the kitchen chair with a scraped knee. "Come here, boy," he said with a firm voice. Took Thomas to the pantry, grabbed a first aid kit, cleaned the wound with surprising care for such large hands, applied iodine, bandaged it. "Done," he said. "Don't climb trees wet from rain anymore. Wood gets slippery and you'll fall again." Thomas, who was so skittish with adults, looked at Henry with something resembling admiration. "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." Laura was the one who broke down Henry's defenses most completely. The girl was quiet, observant, sensitive. She realized quickly that this big, grim man had a soft heart. One day, she picked wildflowers from the field and made a clumsy bouquet. Walked into the kitchen at lunchtime, went straight to Henry, offered the flowers. "For you, sir," she said with a shy but sweet voice. "Because you were nice to us." Henry froze, looked at the flowers, at the girl, at Beatrice, who watched holding her breath. He extended his hand slowly, took the bouquet as if it were the most fragile thing in the world. "Thank you," he said, with a strangely hoarse voice. "They are pretty flowers." Laura smiled, that smile she hadn't shown in months, and ran back to play. Henry stood holding the flowers, looking at them as if he didn't know what to do. Finally got up, took a glass, filled it with water, put the flowers in there, left the glass on the kitchen windowsill where it caught the sun. That was the turning point. After that, Henry started to change subtly, not overnight, not dramatically, but in small gestures. He started asking how the children were, brought a bag of honey candies from the village, and left it in the kitchen without saying who it was for, fixed the gate of the caretaker's cottage that squeaked. Showed up one day with 3 pairs of children's shoes, approximate sizes, left them on Beatrice's porch, with a note saying they were left over from a church donation. If you are enjoying this story, leave a like and share it with someone who also loves emotional stories of resilience. This helps the channel grow a lot. Beatrice watched these changes with an increasingly confused heart. She was grateful, tremendously grateful for his kindness. But she was starting to feel something beyond gratitude, and that frightened her. Henry was handsome in a rugged, mature way. Tall, strong, calloused hands, but careful gestures. A deep voice that did something strange to her stomach. Sad eyes she felt an urge to console. She caught herself thinking about him at inappropriate moments, imagining what it would be like to see that grim face break into a true smile, imagining what it would be like to be held by those strong arms. And then she felt guilty, terribly guilty. Julian had died only 10 months ago. She still wore her wedding ring, still dreamed of him some nights. How could she be feeling attraction for another man so soon? What kind of wife was she? What kind of person? Beatrice tried to push these thoughts away, dove into work, avoided looking at Henry more than necessary. But Henry was also changing regarding her. Beatrice began to notice the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't seeing. A lingering, confused, almost guilty look. The way he pulled away quickly if their hands touched accidentally when passing a plate. The way his voice became softer, almost gentle, when he spoke to her. So different from the harsh tone of the first days. One rainy day in April, Beatrice was washing dishes after lunch. Henry had gone to the office but came back, having forgotten to grab something. She was humming a song Julian liked, softly, without realizing it. Henry stopped in the doorway, stood listening. When Beatrice turned and saw him there, she jumped. "Sorry, sir," she said, blushing. "Didn't know you were there." "You sing well," said Henry abruptly, then looked embarrassed for having spoken. "Been a long time since I heard music in this house," he added more quietly. "It's good. You can sing whenever you want." Beatrice didn't know how to respond. They stood looking at each other for a moment too long to be casual. There was something in the air between them, something electric and dangerous. Henry looked away first, grabbed what he had come for, left too quickly. Beatrice stood there with hands wet with dishwater, heart beating out of rhythm, feeling that something had changed irreversibly. That night, after putting the children to sleep, Beatrice couldn't rest. She stayed on the porch, watching the big house. There was a light on in Henry's room. She wondered if he was also awake, thinking about that moment in the kitchen, if he also felt this confusion of guilt mixed with desire, if he was also fighting against something that felt wrong, but at the same time, inevitable. May arrived, bringing lower temperatures. The farm entered the calm rhythm of the off-season. Henry had more time, walked less exhausted. He started eating supper in the kitchen instead of taking the food to the office. Jasper was always there too, so it wasn't intimate, but it was something. Conversations started to happen, small ones, about banal subjects, but conversations. Henry asked about Beatrice's life, how she had arrived at that situation. She told him, omitting the most humiliating details, but being honest about the widowhood, the dependence on her husband's family, the abandonment. Henry listened in silence, jaw tight. "Family should protect, not cast out," he said with contained anger. "Your brother-in-law is a coward." Beatrice was surprised by his vehemence. She also asked about him, cautiously. Henry resisted at first, but gradually started to talk. About Helen, his wife, how they met at a wedding reception, how he courted her for 2 years before getting her to agree to marry, how they were happy for 5 years, how they tried to have children during all that time, how they finally succeeded, how the pregnancy was difficult, but they were so happy. How everything crumbled in a night of labor that lasted 16 hours and ended with 2 deaths. His voice broke as he told it. Beatrice, without thinking, reached out and covered his hand on top of the table. A small gesture of comfort, of humanity. Henry looked at her small, calloused hand over his large, calloused hand. He didn't pull away. They stayed like that for 10-15 seconds. Jasper had slipped out discreetly. They were alone in the kitchen. The lamp cast a yellowish, dancing light. "You understand," said Henry with a low voice, looking at their joined hands. "You know what it's like to lose someone you thought would be by your side forever. What it's like to wake up in the morning and for a second forget they're gone, and then remember and feel it all over again." Beatrice nodded, eyes full of tears. "I know," she whispered. "I know exactly what it's like." They looked at each other. And in that moment, Beatrice knew she was lost. It wasn't just gratitude, it wasn't just physical attraction. It was something deeper, more dangerous. It was recognition. It was seeing her own pain reflected in another person's eyes, and knowing that you both understood a language the rest of the world didn't speak. It was wanting to heal his wound as much as she wanted him to heal hers. Henry felt it too. Beatrice saw in his eyes the exact moment he realized. Saw the panic, the guilt, the desire all mixed together. He pulled his hand back as if burned, stood up abruptly. "It's late," he said with a harsh voice. "You must be tired. Go rest. Tomorrow we'll continue the conversation." But his voice said there would be no continuation, that he was going to retreat back to the safety of isolation. Beatrice understood. She stood up too, murmured "good night," left. But when she arrived at the cottage and lay in bed, she cried. She cried for the confusion she felt, for the guilt of desiring another man, for the fear of feeling something that would never be returned, for Henry's pain that she wanted so much to alleviate. She cried until sleep came, restless and full of confused dreams. The following days were strange. Henry became distant again, avoiding being alone with her, eating quickly and leaving. Beatrice respected his space, kept herself professional, friendly but not invasive. But the tension was there, palpable every time they were in the same room. Jasper noticed. The old man wasn't a fool. One day he pulled Beatrice aside while she was hanging clothes on the line. "Miss B," he began in a fatherly tone, "I see things. I ain't blind nor deaf, and I see something blooming between you and Mr. Henry." Beatrice blushed, tried to deny it, but Jasper raised a hand. "No need to be ashamed. You're both widowed, still young, alone. It's natural nature. But I need to warn you about something. He hasn't got over Helen yet. There's a room in that house he keeps locked up like a shrine. He visits that room every night before sleep. He's still trapped in the past. So if you're starting to feel something, guard your heart, because his heart still belongs to a dead woman." Jasper's words hurt, but Beatrice knew they were true. She promised herself she would be careful, that she wouldn't allow herself to dream of the impossible. But the heart doesn't obey promises. In mid-October, everything changed. It was an ordinary Thursday. Beatrice was preparing lunch. The children were playing in the backyard under Jasper's supervision. Henry had gone into town to pick up supplies and hadn't returned yet. Around 11 in the morning, Beatrice heard the sound of a car out front. She thought it was Henry coming back. She continued cutting potatoes for the stew. Heavy footsteps on the porch. The kitchen door opened without a knock. Beatrice looked up and felt her blood run cold. Standing in the doorway was Virgil, her brother-in-law. He was thin, dirtier than she remembered, eyes bloodshot from someone who had drunk too much for too long. Rumpled clothes, unshaven beard, a sour smell that reached her even from yards away. But the worst was the expression on his face, rage mixed with desperation. "Found you," Virgil said with a slurred voice. "Did you think I wouldn't find you?" Beatrice dropped the knife, stood up slowly. "Virgil, what are you doing here? How did you find me?" He stepped into the kitchen, stumbled a little. "It was easy," he replied. "Asked in town if anyone knew a widow with 3 kids who showed up out of nowhere. Sent me right here. This farm is well known. Everybody knows where it is." Beatrice felt fear climb up her spine. "What do you want, Virgil?" He laughed, a wet, unpleasant sound. "What do I want? I want you to come back. Mama's sick, needs taking care of. Connie left me, the bitch. Took all the money I had and ran off with another guy. The store closed down. I'm up the creek, B. I need you to come back and take care of Mama. In exchange, I give you a roof and food like before. It's a good deal." Beatrice felt nausea. "I'm not going back," she said, with a voice that was firm, despite the fear. "You threw me on the street in a storm with my children. I almost died. I have a job here. I have a home, dignity. I won't go back to be your mother's maid again." Virgil stepped closer, eyes dangerous. "Yes, you will. I'm your brother-in-law. I'm the family you got. Those kids have my blood. They're my nephews. You have an obligation to help family." "I don't have any obligation," Beatrice replied, backing away. "You gave up the right to demand anything when you abandoned me on the road. Now get out of here before the owner of the house arrives." Virgil took a threatening step. "You think this rich farmer is going to defend you? You think he cares about you? You're just the help bee. He uses you. uses your work. And when he gets tired, he's going to toss you out just like I did. The difference is, at least I'm family." The back door opened suddenly. Henry entered, arms full of grocery bags. He stopped when he saw Virgil, looked from one to the other, realized the situation immediately. He set the bags down slowly. "Who are you?" he asked with a low, dangerous voice. "And what are you doing in my house?" Virgil straightened up, tried to look bigger than he was. "I'm Virgil Cordell, her brother-in-law," he said, pointing at Beatrice. "I came to get what's mine." Henry stepped closer. "The only thing that's yours here is the road back to where you came from," he said, his voice calm but sharp as a razor. "Beatrice works for me now. She and the children are under my protection. You aren't welcome here." Virgil laughed with scorn. "Protection? What kind of protection? You sleeping with her, is that it? Pretty widow, all alone, you offer a house in exchange for favors? Is that how it works?" Henry crossed the kitchen in 3 long strides, grabbed Virgil by the shirt collar, lifted him almost off the floor. "Watch your mouth," Henry growled. "Beatrice is an honorable woman who works honestly. You're the worm who left her and the kids to die. Now you get off my property in 5 seconds, or I drag you to the gate and throw you on the road myself." Virgil tried to break free, couldn't. Henry was much stronger. "You can't do this," Virgil protested, his voice higher now, scared. "She's my sister-in-law. I have rights." "You have no rights," Henry said, shoving him toward the door. "And if you come back here, if you try to contact her or the kids again, I'm calling the sheriff and filing charges for trespassing and threats. Now get out." Virgil stumbled to the door, looked at Beatrice with hatred. "You're gonna regret this," he said, spitting the words. "When he gets tired of you, when he throws you away, don't come looking for me, don't come asking for help. You're gonna die alone and abandoned like a stray dog, and it'll be exactly what you deserve." He left, slamming the door violently. They heard the sound of the car peeling out, tires skidding on the dirt. A heavy silence fell over the kitchen. Beatrice was shaking, hands gripping the edge of the table to keep from falling. Henry came back, stood near her, didn't touch her but was there. "You all right?" he asked with a gentle voice. Beatrice nodded, but the tears began to fall. They weren't tears of fear. They were tears of rage, humiliation, relief, gratitude, all mixed together. Henry hesitated, then placed his hand on her shoulder, an awkward gesture of comfort. "He won't come back," he said, "and if he does, I'll handle it. You're safe here, Beatrice, you and the kids. I promise." Beatrice looked at him through her tears. "Why do you do this, sir?" she asked with a broken voice. "Why help me so much? You don't even know me. I'm nothing to you." Henry remained silent for a long moment. His hand was still on her shoulder, warm and firm. When he finally spoke, his voice was raspy. "You aren't nothing. You cook food that makes me remember I still have a sense of taste. You sing songs that make me remember I still have ears. Your children run through this house and make me remember there's still joy in the world. You look at me without pity, just with understanding, and make me remember I'm still human under this shell. So don't say you aren't nothing. You brought life back to a house that's been dead for 3 years. Beatrice turned to face him. They were very close. She could see the lines around his eyes, see the grey strands in his beard, see the depth of the pain and loneliness he carried. She could also see something else, something that made her tremble for different reasons. "Henry," she whispered. He was trembling too, she realized. His hand moved from her shoulder to her face, touched her cheek with a tenderness that contrasted with the hardness of his calloused hands. They were inches from each other. Beatrice saw the conflict in his eyes, desire fighting against guilt, present fighting against past. She felt the same. The memory of Julian weighed on her like a stone, but Julian was dead, and she was alive, and this man in front of her was alive, and they were both so lonely and so wounded and so ready to perhaps start healing. Henry leaned closer. Beatrice closed her eyes, heart racing, waiting, and then they heard Michael's voice coming from the yard, calling "Mama!" in an urgent tone. They pulled apart sharply as if they had been burned. Henry retreated several steps, ran a hand over his face. Beatrice wiped her tears quickly, went to the door to see what Michael wanted. It was just the boy wanting to show a beetle he had found. Nothing urgent. When she returned, Henry had already left. The grocery bags were on the table, but he had vanished. Beatrice stood there, heart still pounding, body still shaking from the almost event. She didn't know if she felt relief or disappointment. Probably both. That night, Henry didn't show up for supper. Jasper ate alone with Beatrice, made light conversation about nothing important, but his old wise eyes said he knew something had happened. Beatrice took a plate of food to the big house, left it in the kitchen cupboard, and went back to her cottage. She couldn't sleep. She kept tossing and turning, replaying every moment of that afternoon. Virgil's violence, Henry's words, the almost kiss, the way he looked at her. The way he said she had brought life back to that house. Did he feel the same as she did? Or was she misinterpreting, seeing what she wanted to see, and even if he did feel it, would it be right? Julian had died only 10 months ago. Was it too soon to love again? Beatrice didn't know. The pain of losing Julian was still there, real and present. She still loved him, still missed him, but at the same time, Julian wasn't coming back. She was only 29. Was she going to spend the rest of her life alone out of loyalty to a ghost? Would Julian want that? He who was always so full of life, who always wanted her to be happy. Beatrice had no answers, only more questions, more confusion. Eventually, exhaustion won out and she slept, a restless sleep full of dreams that mixed Julian and Henry in nonsensical narratives. The following days were a careful dance. Henry returned to appearing for meals, but he was polite, distant, didn't mention what almost happened. Beatrice didn't mention it either. They talked about practical, neutral subjects, but there was something in the air, a tension that Jasper perceived and that made the old man smile in secret. The children, oblivious to the complexity of adults, continued melting Henry's heart. Michael had developed a special attachment to the farmer, followed him when he could, mimicked his gestures. Henry tried to resist at first, but it was impossible to resist a 3-year-old boy looking at him with adoration. He started picking Michael up sometimes, teaching him small things, letting the boy help with simple chores. Thomas also drew closer, slower but solidly. The boy needed a father figure, and Henry, even trying not to get involved, couldn't say no when Thomas asked to help in the barn or learn how to fix a fence. Laura continued being the most open, offering drawings, flowers, talking without shyness. Beatrice watched all this with a tight heart. She saw Henry transforming before her eyes, becoming human again, opening up to connection, even while fighting against it. She saw her children blossoming again, recovering the childhood they had lost with their father's death and the months of misery after. She saw a family forming, unlikely and imperfect, but real. And she felt fear that it was temporary, fear that Henry would wake up one day and realize he didn't want this responsibility. Fear that Virgil would come back with worse problems, fear of giving herself completely to this growing feeling and then being destroyed when it all crumbled. But she also felt hope. Hope she had forgotten existed. Hope that maybe, just maybe, devastation wasn't the end of the story. That perhaps from the storm something good could be born. That perhaps 2 broken hearts could fix each other. In December, the real cold arrived. The mornings brought frost, the nights demanded extra quilts. Henry showed up one day with thick wool blankets, left them at the caretaker's cottage. He sealed the cracks in the windows to keep the wind out, brought extra firewood for the stove. He cared, without words, only with actions. Beatrice reciprocated the way she knew how. She cooked his favorite dishes she had learned from Jasper, kept the big house spotless, smelling of cleanliness and care. Mended torn clothes, sewed on lost buttons. She cared without words, only with actions. It was a silent language they both spoke, saying without saying that they mattered, that they were there for each other, even without completely understanding what was happening between them. And the locked room at the end of the hall remained there, a constant presence, a reminder of the past Henry couldn't let go of. Beatrice passed by the door every time she cleaned the upstairs. Sometimes she stood there imagining what was inside, imagining what needed to happen for Henry to finally open that door and let light and air into that sanctuary of pain. But it wasn't her decision. Only Henry could open that door, and Beatrice would wait for as long as necessary, because she was starting to realize something terrifying and wonderful at the same time. She was falling in love with that silent, wounded man. And there was nothing she could do about it except wait and hope that he, eventually, could fall in love back. December advanced with increasingly intense cold. The dawn frosts painted the fields white. The sun took a long time to appear, and when it finally did, it was pale and weak. Beatrice woke up shivering, lit the wood stove before anything else, prepared hot water to wash the faces of the children who complained about the biting cold. At this time of year, the farm entered an even calmer rhythm. Henry spent more time at the house, maintaining equipment, fixing fences, planning for the spring planting. This meant he and Beatrice saw each other more, shared more meals, exchanged more words. The tension between them didn't diminish. It just changed quality. It was no longer discomfort. It was something electric, charged with unspoken possibilities. The children noticed the change in the adult's manner, even without fully understanding. Laura made innocent comments like, "Mr. Henry smiled today, Mama, did you see?" Michael had started calling Henry Mr. Hen, a nickname the farmer accepted with surprising tolerance. Thomas, more observant and serious, sometimes looked from one adult to the other with a thoughtful expression, but said nothing. One night in mid-December, Henry showed up for supper and brought a bottle of wine. It wasn't common. He usually drank only water or coffee. Jasper raised his eyebrows but didn't comment. Beatrice served supper, beef stew with potatoes and carrots, homemade bread still warm, sautéed collard greens. Henry opened the wine, poured for the three of them. "It's to celebrate," he said with a voice a bit awkward. "Last year's harvest yielded more than I expected. I managed to pay off all the farm debts. For the first time in 3 years, the property is completely in the black." Jasper clapped his hands, genuinely happy. "That's mighty good, boss. Cheers to that." Beatrice raised her glass, smiling. "Congratulations, Henry. You work hard, you deserve this victory." Using his first name came out naturally without the Mr. in front. Henry noticed something passed through his eyes, but he didn't comment. He just raised his own glass. "It's not just my merit," he said, looking at Beatrice. "This house is running better than it has in years. Good food, clean clothes, organization. That helps a man work better. So thank you too, Beatrice." The way he said her name, slowly, savoring the syllables, did something strange to Beatrice's stomach. She took a sip of wine to hide the flush rising up her neck. The wine was good, full-bodied, warming her from the inside. Jasper started telling old stories about the farm, from the times when Henry's father was still alive, when the property had more hands, more movement. Henry listened, sometimes added details, laughed at funny memories. Beatrice realized it was the first time she had seen Henry really laugh. Not a small smile, but true laughter that reached his eyes and completely transformed his face. He looked younger when he laughed. The hardness dissolved, revealing the man he had been before the tragedy. Beatrice caught herself imagining what it would have been like to know that Henry, the one from before, the one who didn't carry so much weight. The night advanced with conversation and wine. Jasper eventually said his goodbyes, said he was tired, went to his cabin. Beatrice started gathering the plates. Henry helped, something he never did. They washed the dishes together, her washing and him drying, in a comfortable silence, broken only by the sound of water and china. When they finished, Beatrice dried her hands on her apron, turned to wish him good night. Henry was close, closer than she had realized. He had wine on his lips and courage in his eyes that the wine had given him. "Beatrice," he said with a low voice, "I need to tell you something." Her heart raced. "Tell me," she whispered. Henry took a deep breath. "I tried not to feel it," he said. "Tried to keep my distance, tried to convince myself it's too soon, that it's wrong, that I'm betraying Helen's memory. But I can't pretend anymore. You walked into this house and brought light with you. I look at you and I see a future, not the past. I look at your children and I see family, not loss. And I don't know if that makes me a bad man, but I need you to know that I—" He stopped, froze, as if the words were too big to get out. Beatrice took a step toward him, heart beating so hard she was sure he could hear it. "That you what?" she asked softly. Henry looked into her eyes, vulnerable in a way she had never seen. "That I care about you," he said finally. "A lot. More than is sensible. More than I thought I'd be capable of feeling again." Beatrice felt hot tears in her eyes. "Me too," she whispered. "I care about you too. I tried not to feel it. I felt guilty, thought I was betraying Julian. But he's gone, Henry, and we're here, alive, and life can't stop just because we loved people who are gone." Henry raised his hand, touched her face with infinite tenderness. "Do you think they'd want us to stay alone forever?" he asked. Beatrice shook her head. "No, Julian would want me to be happy. He was generous like that. And Helen would want the same for me," said Henry with a raspy voice. "She had a huge heart. She wouldn't want me to turn to stone." Muh. They stood like that, looking at each other, millimeters apart, breaths mixing. And then Henry leaned in and kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, almost hesitant, as if both were afraid of breaking something precious. Soft lips, taste of wine, warmth. Beatrice felt the world tilt on its axis, felt years of loneliness and pain dissolving in that simple and deep contact. She responded to the kiss, raised her hands to his chest, felt Henry's heart beating as fast as hers. When they parted, both were trembling. Henry rested his forehead against hers, closed his eyes. "I'm scared," he admitted. "Scared of losing again. Scared of being happy and having it ripped away from me. I don't know if I can take going through that again." Beatrice held his face between her hands. "I'm scared too," she said. "But staying alone forever because we're scared of losing isn't living. It's just existing. And I'm tired of just existing. I want to live again." Henry opened his eyes, looked at her with an intensity that stole Beatrice's breath. "Then let's live," he said, "together." He kissed her again, deeper this time, less hesitant. Beatrice allowed herself to melt into that kiss, into that embrace, into that promise of a new beginning. They stood there for long minutes, just holding each other, rediscovering what it was like to be touched with affection, to be desired, to be loved. Eventually they parted, because it was late, and Beatrice needed to get back to the cottage, where the children were sleeping. But something had changed irrevocably. When she crossed the stone path back to the caretaker's cottage, the night chill didn't bother her. She was warm on the inside, lit by hope and possibility. The following days were different. Henry and Beatrice no longer tried to hide what they felt. They weren't scandalous, didn't make public displays, but there was a new softness in the way he spoke to her, a new intimacy in the way she smiled at him. Jasper watched everything with approval, commented to Beatrice that it was about time those two stopped fighting the obvious. The children also noticed. Michael asked innocently if Mr. Hen was going to be their daddy now. Laura wanted to know if they were all going to live together in the big house. Thomas, more reserved, pulled his mother aside and asked seriously if she liked Henry. When Beatrice confirmed she did, the boy was silent for a moment, then nodded. "He's good," Thomas said with wisdom beyond his 7 years. "He takes care of us. It's okay if you like him, Mom. Dad would understand." Thomas's approval broke something in Beatrice. She hugged her son, crying, grateful for the generosity of that child who had matured too fast, but still had the capacity to accept change and new love. Everything seemed to be finally falling into place. And then came the storm. It was January, deep winter. The cold was brutal, temperatures below freezing at night. Michael had woken up on Monday complaining that his throat hurt. Beatrice gave him honey tea, bundled the boy in quilts, thought it was just a common cold. On Tuesday, Michael had a fever, not very high but constant. Beatrice gave him the tonic Henry had provided months ago, warm baths, more tea. On Wednesday, the fever spiked. Michael was red, burning up, delirious. Beatrice panicked. She ran to the big house, found Henry in the barn. He saw her expression and dropped everything. "What happened?" he asked, grabbing her by the shoulders. "It's Michael," she said with a trembling voice. "He's very sick. A fever, can't eat anything, saying things that don't make sense. I don't know what to do." Henry didn't hesitate. "I'm going for the doctor," he said. "Stay with him, keep him warm, but don't let him burn up. Lukewarm bath if the temperature gets too high. I'll be back as fast as I can." He ran out, prepped the horse in minutes, the truck wouldn't start in this cold, and galloped down the dusty road toward town. Beatrice went back to Michael. The boy was worse, coughing in a worrying way, breathing difficult and wheezing. Laura and Thomas watched, frightened. Jasper appeared, offered help. They improvised, made a steam tent with water and eucalyptus, tried to lower the fever with wet cloths. It took Henry 3 hours to return. When he arrived, he brought Dr. Meadows, the old town doctor, and a grim expression. The doctor examined Michael carefully, listened to his lungs, checked his throat, took his temperature. When he finished, he called Beatrice and Henry to the corner of the room. "It's pneumonia," said Dr. Meadows gravely. "Advanced stage. The left lung is compromised." Beatrice felt the world spin. Pneumonia? But how? Dr. Meadows explained that small children could develop pneumonia quickly, especially in intense cold conditions. "The boy is weak," the doctor continued, "needs constant care, strong medication, and a lot of luck. I'll leave medicine, but I'll be honest with you folks. It's serious. The next 3 days will decide if he improves or if—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Beatrice crumbled. Henry caught her, kept her from falling. "No!" she cried. "No! I won't lose my son. I can't take losing anyone else." Dr. Meadows put medicine on the table, gave detailed instructions, said he would return the next day to check. The night was the worst of Beatrice's life since Julian's death. Michael burned with fever, coughed until he retched, breathed with terrifying difficulty. Beatrice didn't leave his side, administered the medicine at the right times, wiped away the sweat, prayed every prayer she knew. Henry stayed too, even though she said he didn't have to. "I'm not leaving you alone," he said firmly. Jasper took Laura and Thomas to sleep in his cabin, sparing them the terror of the vigil. In the early hours, Michael got drastically worse. The fever climbed to dangerous levels. His breathing became so difficult, he started turning blue. "He's going to die," screamed Beatrice in panic. "Henry, he's going to die." Henry scooped the boy into his arms. "He is not," he said with iron determination. "I won't let him." "Beatrice, where did Dr. Meadows say there's a hospital with better facilities?" "In Nashville," she replied between sobs. "But that's over 60 miles. Hours of travel, and at night with this ice." "Doesn't matter," interrupted Henry. "I'm taking him. You're coming too, now." He wrapped Michael in blankets, grabbed more quilts, carried the boy to the truck. He managed to crank the engine this time. Beatrice climbed into the back seat, holding her son. Henry drove like a madman down the dark, icy road. The trip was a nightmare. Michael convulsed in Beatrice's arms. She sang to him, whispered that everything would be okay, begged God not to take her baby. Henry drove with a locked jaw, hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel, pushing the old truck to its limit. The dirt road was treacherous, full of potholes and slick patches. Several times the truck almost slid into a ditch. Henry didn't slow down. They reached the hospital in Nashville at 5 in the morning. Henry carried Michael inside, screaming for help. Nurses came running, took the boy to the emergency room. Doctors gathered, doors closed. Beatrice and Henry stayed outside, her crying convulsively, him hugging her tightly, both covered in mud and exhausted. They waited 2 hours. They were the 2 longest hours of their lives. Beatrice prayed, bargained with God, promised anything in exchange for her son's life. Henry, who hadn't prayed in 3 years, prayed too, offered his own life in exchange for the life of that little boy who had stolen his heart without asking permission. Finally, a doctor came out. Expression tired, but not grim. "He's going to make it," said the doctor. "It was close, but we managed to stabilize him. We've got him on fluids, oxygen, strong antibiotics by injection. The lungs will recover, but it will take time. He needs to stay admitted for at least a week, maybe more." Beatrice collapsed on the floor, crying with relief. Henry sat down beside her, pulled her to his chest and cried too. Silent tears he tried to hide, but couldn't. They stayed with Michael all day. The boy slept heavily under the effect of the medication, but he breathed better. The color had returned to his face. In the late afternoon, a kind nurse suggested they go eat and rest, that Michael was stable and they needed to take care of themselves too. Henry agreed, almost dragged Beatrice out. They found a simple motel near the hospital. Henry paid for a room. Beatrice was so exhausted she barely noticed it was just a room with one bed. She collapsed onto the bed, fully dressed, and passed out immediately. Henry sat in the chair beside her, watching her sleep, unable to rest. The fear of almost losing Michael was still fresh, sharp. He realized in those terrible hours something perhaps he already knew but hadn't admitted. Those children were his now, not by blood, but by heart. He loved those 3 little ones as if they were his own. And he loved the woman lying on the bed like he didn't think he was capable of loving again. When Beatrice woke up hours later, it was already night. Henry had brought food, bread, cheese, fruit, something simple. She ate mechanically, still dazed. "Sorry," she said with a raspy voice. "I passed out and left you without a bed. You should have woken me." Henry shook his head. "You needed sleep. I'm fine in the chair." Beatrice looked at him, really looked. He was wrecked, clothes dirty from the trip, face marked with exhaustion, eyes sunken. But he was there, solid, present. "You saved my son," she said with a broken voice. "If you hadn't driven like a maniac, if you hadn't risked your own life on that dangerous road at night, he would have died. You saved him, Henry." Henry stood up, went to the bed, sat on the edge. "He's my son too," he said simply. "Maybe not by blood, but in everything else. He's mine. All 3 are mine. You are my family now, Beatrice, and I protect what's mine." Beatrice threw herself into his arms, cried again, but it was a different cry. It was crying from gratitude, overflowing love, absolute certainty that this man was what she wanted for the rest of her life. When the crying calmed, she looked into his eyes. "I love you," she said. The words came out simple, true, impossible to hold back. "I love you, Henry. I know it's too soon. I know we should wait longer, but I almost lost my son today and I realized life is too short not to tell the truth. I love you." Henry held her face in his large hands. "I love you too," he said with a voice raspy but firm. "I love you, and I love your children. I want you all to stay with me forever, not as maid and boss, as family, as wife and children. Marry me, Beatrice. Let me be a father to these kids. Let me make you happy for the rest of your life." Beatrice could barely believe what she was hearing. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times, yes." They kissed, deep and desperate, sealing a promise both knew they would honor. They stayed embraced for long minutes, just feeling each other's presence, grateful to be alive, together, and ready to build a future. Michael improved rapidly in the following days. Children had an impressive capacity for recovery. In 3 days, he was sitting up in bed, asking questions. In 5 days, he was complaining about the hospital food. In 8 days, he was discharged with recommendations for rest and medication. They returned to the farm, Michael in Beatrice's lap, Henry driving slower this time. Laura and Thomas exploded with joy upon seeing their brother. Jasper cried like a baby. There were hugs, laughter, tears of relief. That night, Henry gathered the 3 children in the living room and made an announcement. "I asked your mother to marry me," he said with a formal voice but soft eyes. "She accepted, but I wanted to know what you think about it. Are you okay with the idea of me marrying your mum? Of me being your dad? If you love stories of resilience and true love, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon. Every subscriber makes a difference." Michael yelled, "Yes," immediately and jumped into Henry's lap. Laura clapped her hands and asked if there would be a party with cake. Thomas, more serious, looked from Henry to his mother and back. "You gonna take care of her, right?" asked the boy with maturity frightening for a 7-year-old. "You gonna make her happy?" Henry looked directly into Thomas's eyes. "I will," he promised solemnly. "Every day of my life I will make her happy. And you kids too. You're gonna be my real children, with papers signed and everything." Thomas studied his face for a few more seconds, then nodded. "Okay," he said. "Then you can marry her." The wedding was set for late February, 2 months later. A simple wedding at the town courthouse, just Jasper as a witness, and the 3 children. Beatrice wore a simple white dress she sewed herself. Henry wore a suit he hadn't worn in years. When they exchanged rings, both cried. When the judge said they were married, Henry kissed Beatrice with infinite tenderness. The children applauded, but before the wedding, something important needed to happen. A week before the ceremony, Henry called Beatrice and asked her to accompany him. He led her to the big house, up the stairs, stopped in front of the locked door at the end of the hall. Beatrice understood immediately. Her heart sped up. Henry took the key from his pocket, looked at her. "I need to do this," he said with a choked voice. "I need to let go, and I need you to be with me when I do it." Beatrice took his hand, squeezed tight. "I'm here," she said. Henry took a deep breath, put the key in the lock, turned it. The door opened with the creak of 3 years without use. The smell of a closed room came out first. Then they entered. The room was small, painted a soft yellow. It had a hand-carved wooden crib, work clearly done with love. A mobile of cloth animals hung above the crib, swaying with the breeze that entered through the door. A small dresser with tiny clothes folded perfectly, a rocking chair near the window, wooden toys on a shelf. Everything covered by a thin layer of dust, but preserved like a sanctuary. Henry stood in the middle of the room looking around with an expression of deep pain. "I spent 6 months making that crib," he said with a brittle voice. "Every detail, every carving. I wanted it to be perfect, wanted my child to know I loved him before he was even born." Tears ran down his face without embarrassment. Helen sewed all these little clothes. She sang while she sewed, invented stories about what our child would be like. We debated names every night, couldn't decide. We were going to wait to see his face to know which name fit. Beatrice was crying too, hugged Henry from behind. "They were lucky to have you," she said softly, "even for a short time, even only in promise. They were loved deeply. That matters, Henry." Henry turned, hugged her tightly. "I'm scared of forgetting," he confessed. "If I close this room, if I give these things away, if I move on, I'm scared of forgetting what it was like to love them." "You will never forget," said Beatrice with certainty. "They will always be in your heart, but keeping this room locked doesn't keep them alive. It only keeps you trapped. They wouldn't want that for you." Henry knew she was right. He stayed silent for a long moment, just breathing, letting the pain flow. Finally he let go, went to the crib, ran his hand over the carved wood. "Goodbye," he whispered. "Thank you for the time I had with you. Thank you for teaching me to love. I will carry you with me always, but I need to live now. I hope you understand." He picked up one of the tiny outfits, folded it carefully, put it in his pocket. "This I'll keep," he said. "The rest we can donate to some family that needs it." These things were made with love. They deserve to be used, not sit here gathering mold. Beatrice nodded, proud of him, proud of the courage he was showing. They left the room together, left the door open. Light and air could finally enter. In the following days, Beatrice cleaned the room with reverence, washed the little clothes, packed them carefully. Henry took everything to the church, donated it to needy families. The crib he disassembled, stored in the attic. "Someday," he said, "we might need it again. If we have more children, we'll use it." Beatrice smiled, warmed by the possibility. The wedding was beautiful despite the simplicity. The party was at the farm. Jasper prepared a barbecue. Neighbors showed up bringing food and drink. Children ran through the yard. Adults talked and laughed. Beatrice danced with Henry under the stars, music playing from an old radio. She had never been so happy. Henry held her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. That night, Beatrice and the children moved permanently into the big house. Thomas and Michael would share the room that had been for guests. Laura would take the smaller room, and the yellow room, after weeks of renovation that Beatrice and Henry did together, became an office and library. Transformation, not destruction. 2 weeks after the wedding, Virgil showed up again. Beatrice saw his car through the window, felt her stomach tighten. She alerted Henry, who was in the corral. Henry dropped everything and came. This time he didn't wait for Virgil to get out of the car. He went to him, opened the driver's door, pulled Beatrice's brother-in-law out. "You were warned not to return," said Henry with a dangerously calm voice. Virgil smelled of booze as always, but there was desperation in his eyes. "I just came to ask for help," he said with a whining voice. "Mama died, B. Mrs. Irene died last week. I got nobody, got no money. I'm starving. Your family, you have to help." Beatrice, who had come out of the house, felt pity despite everything. Henry felt her soften and held firm. "He abandoned you in the rain to die," Henry reminded her. "Kicked you out pregnant and with children. Now he wants charity?" Virgil whined more. "I was wrong. I know I was wrong. But I don't have anyone else." Beatrice looked at that pathetic man, the brother-in-law who had been so cruel, now reduced to a beggar. She felt pity, but not guilt. "I'll give you one thing," she said with a firm voice. "One single thing, because I'm not cruel like you were. Henry, pay 3 months at a rooming house for him somewhere in town. 3 months, enough time for him to find work and get organized. After that, he's on his own." Henry didn't like it, but respected her decision. He arranged a cheap rooming house, paid 3 months in advance, gave money for 2 weeks of food. "After this," said Henry, pushing Virgil back toward the car, "you never come near my family again. If I see you on this road again, I'm calling the sheriff and filing formal charges. Understood?" Virgil understood. He left and never came back. Beatrice learned later through town gossip that he had found a job at a sawmill in another county, had stopped drinking, was trying to rebuild his life. She was pleased for him, but had no interest in renewing contact. That chapter was closed. In October, Henry initiated the legal adoption process for Thomas, Laura, and Michael. It was long, bureaucratic, required papers and more papers, but in December, The judge signed. The three children officially became Thomas Sullivan, Laura Sullivan, and Michael Sullivan. Henry cried when he received the documents. "They're mine," he said with a choked voice. "Now they're officially mine." Life settled into a happy rhythm. The farm prospered under the management of a renewed Henry. Beatrice took care of the house and the children, but also started helping with administration, discovered she had a talent for numbers and organization. Jasper, happy with the farm's transformation, worked with the energy of a younger man. In March of 1979, exactly 1 year after that stormy night, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant. Henry received the news with a mixture of joy and fear. Understandable fear, considering what had happened before. But Beatrice was strong, the pregnancy went well, and in November of 1979, a healthy girl was born whom they named Helen, in honor of Henry's first wife. Beatrice had suggested the name without jealousy, only with the recognition that that woman had been important and deserved to be remembered. Thomas, now 8 years old, was a proud big brother. Laura, at 6, helped take care of the baby with touching dedication. Michael, 4 years old and completely recovered from pneumonia, was enchanted by his little sister, spending hours just watching her sleep. The years passed with the speed that happy years have. 1980, 1981, 1982. The farm grew. They bought neighboring land, hired more hands, built a new house for Jasper, better and bigger. The children grew up healthy and loved. Thomas showed talent for handling animals. Laura liked plants, helped in the vegetable garden that had expanded into a small commercial project. Michael was a born mechanic, loved taking apart and assembling anything. Helen was the youngest, spoiled by everyone. In 1983, Beatrice got pregnant again. This time a boy, who was born in 1984 and was named Julian, in honor of Beatrice's first husband. Henry had suggested it, just as she had suggested Helen. It was a way to honor those who were gone, to show the children that it was possible to love again without forgetting previous loves. In 1987, Beatrice was sitting on the porch of the big house, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. Thomas, now 16, was in the corral helping his father with new cattle. Laura, at 14, was picking vegetables in the garden. Michael, at 12, was in the shed fixing the tractor with Jasper. Helen, at 7, played in the yard with Julian, 3 years old. Henry came out of the house, sat beside her, took her hand. "What are you thinking about?" he asked with that soft smile she loved so much. Beatrice squeezed his hand. "I'm thinking about that night," she said. "The night of the storm. When I thought I had reached the end, that I had nothing left, that I was going to die there in the mud with my children, and then you appeared like a miracle and saved us." Henry pulled her close, kissed her temple. "We saved each other," he corrected. "You brought me back to life just as much as I gave you shelter. You gave me family again, gave me a reason to wake up in the morning. You gave me love when I thought I would never love again." Beatrice snuggled into him, listening to his heart beat firm and steady. "Who would have said the worst night of my life would lead me to the best thing that ever happened to me?" she murmured. "Sometimes the storm comes to wash away what no longer serves us," said Henry thoughtfully, "to make room for the new. That night washed away our past of pain and made room for a future of joy. We needed that suffering to recognize the blessing when it arrived." Beatrice nodded, knowing he was right. She looked at her children playing, at the prosperous farm, at the immense sky above them. Thought of the journey she had made, from desperate widowhood to full motherhood, from abandonment to unconditional love. "Do you regret anything?" Henry asked suddenly. Beatrice thought honestly before answering. "No," she said with certainty. "Not even the bad parts. Because the bad parts brought me here, brought me to you, taught me to value what I have now. So no, I don't regret anything." Henry kissed her, long and soft, as if they had all the time in the world. And they did. That night, after all the children were sleeping, Beatrice and Henry stood on the porch, watching the stars. The night was clear, a full moon illuminating the fields. You could see miles of land that was theirs, a life they had built together. "I love you," Henry said suddenly. Beatrice turned to him, smiled that smile that still made his heart race after all these years. "I love you too," she replied. "Today, tomorrow, always." And there, under the starry Tennessee sky, 9 years after that terrible stormy night that almost destroyed them, they stood embraced, grateful, grateful for the storm that brought them together, grateful for the pain that taught them to value joy, grateful for having found each other at the exact moment they both needed it most, grateful for having the courage to love again, despite the fear, despite the guilt, despite everything, because in the end, love always wins. Even when it seems impossible, even when the whole world crumbles, even in the worst storm, there is a gate opening, a light appearing in the darkness, a generous heart ready to save. And sometimes, just sometimes, the most beautiful stories are born from the most terrible nights, like theirs was born, as it will always be remembered. The story of the widow who was abandoned in the rain, and the lonely farmer who emerged in the storm to save her, without knowing that she would save him too. Two broken souls who fixed each other and built upon ruins of pain a palace of love that would last forever.